In the annals of military history, few tanks are as iconic or as debated as the M4 Sherman. For many, it's the symbol of American industrial might, the workhorse that spearheaded the Allied victory in World War II. But beneath the veneer of its widespread production and eventual triumph lies a story often glossed over, a tale of immense courage, brutal realities, and the unspeakable horrors faced by the men who crewed these steel beasts. Today, we're going to dive deep into why the Sherman, for all its successes, was also a crucible of unimaginable suffering for its crews. When we look at the Sherman, it's essential to understand its context. It wasn't designed to be the ultimate tank killer. It was designed for speed of production, reliability, and to support infantry. America entered World War II needing a tank and needing it fast. The M4 was the answer, a compromise born of necessity. It had a respectable 75mm gun, later a 76mm, good mobility, and a relatively low profile compared to some of its behemoth adversaries. But these strengths often masked critical vulnerabilities, particularly when facing the sophisticated, heavily armored, and lethally armed German tanks on the Western Front.
Let's start with the most obvious and deadly factor: armor protection and the Ronson myth. The Sherman's armor, while decent against earlier anti-tank weapons and some German tank guns, was woefully inadequate against the high-velocity 7.5cm KWK-42 of the Panther, or the monstrous 8.8cm KWK-36 and 43 of the Tiger I and King Tiger. A frontal hit from these German giants, even at long range, often meant penetration. Now, the infamous nickname Ronson, or Tommy Cooker, referring to the Sherman's supposed tendency to burst into flames, is a complex issue. It's not entirely accurate to say all Shermans were death traps, but the early models, and even later ones, certainly had a higher propensity for catastrophic fires than their German counterparts. Why? Ammunition storage. Early Shermans stored their 75mm rounds in racks above the sponsons, unprotected. When a shell penetrated the side, it would often ignite the propellant charges, leading to a fiery inferno.
Imagine being inside that steel box. A sudden clang, a blinding flash, the roar of burning fuel and ammunition. The temperature inside could skyrocket in seconds, turning the tank into an oven. Escape hatches were often jammed, or the crew simply couldn't move fast enough in their cramped quarters. The fear wasn't just of being hit, but of being incinerated. This created a psychological burden on Sherman crews that is hard for us to truly comprehend. Every engagement was a roll of the dice, not just for survival, but for a swift death versus a terrifying one. The introduction of wet stowage, where ammunition was stored in water glycol mixture-lined bins, significantly reduced the fire risk. This was a crucial, life-saving innovation. But it came later in the war, and many crews in crucial early engagements still faced the dry stowage lottery. This constant threat of immolation profoundly shaped the Sherman crew's experience, often leading to a grim fatalism.
Beyond the fire, there was the sheer disparity in firepower and the psychological toll of being outgunned. While the Sherman's 75mm gun was excellent for infantry support and engaging soft targets, it struggled against the thick frontal armor of the Panther and Tiger. For a Sherman to reliably knock out a Tiger, it often had to maneuver to the flanks or rear, a dangerous and often impossible task under fire. This meant Sherman crews frequently found themselves in situations where they had to get dangerously close or land multiple well-placed shots while knowing a single hit from their adversary could be fatal. The American doctrine actually relied heavily on tank destroyers to deal with enemy armor. The idea was that tanks supported infantry, and specialist tank destroyers destroyed tanks. This doctrine, while sound on paper, often left Sherman crews feeling exposed and undergunned in direct engagements with German heavy armor. They were expected to hold the line, buy time, or even engage, knowing their chances were stacked against them. This created a profound sense of vulnerability. It wasn't just about fighting. It was about fighting an enemy that could, with relative ease, punch through your defenses while you struggled to return the favor. And let's not forget the omnipresent threat of anti-tank weapons. While German tanks were formidable, the infantry-deployed anti-tank weapons were equally terrifying. The Panzerfaust, Panzerschreck, and concealed AT guns could turn a Sherman into scrap metal in an instant. A Sherman advancing through a village or dense woodland was a prime target for these hidden threats. The very mobility that made the Sherman so effective also put it into harm's way more frequently. Crews had to be constantly vigilant, scanning for glints, movements, or muzzle flashes that signaled imminent destruction. The tension inside the tank must have been unbearable, a constant state of hyper-awareness, knowing death could come from any window, any hedgerow, any camouflaged position.
Then there's the cramped and claustrophobic interior. A Sherman crew of 5, commander, gunner, loader, driver, and co-driver bow gunner, operated in extremely tight quarters. Imagine sitting for hours, even days, surrounded by steel, roaring machinery, and the smell of oil, sweat, and gunpowder. There was little room to move, no privacy, and certainly no comfort. This physical confinement, combined with the constant threat of death, was a psychological pressure cooker. Communication within the tank, though aided by intercoms, was still difficult over the engine noise. The commander, often exposed from the turret hatch for better visibility, was a prime target for snipers. Each crew member had a vital, interdependent role, meaning the loss of one could severely impair the tank's effectiveness and the survival chances of the others. The shared intimacy of that confined space, in the face of such extreme danger, forged bonds that were unbreakable, but also magnified the horror of seeing a comrade fall. The survival rate for Sherman crews, especially early in the war, was often tragically low. Some estimates suggest that a tank crewman had one of the lowest life expectancies in the entire Army. This wasn't just about direct hits. It was also about injuries. Even non-penetrating hits could cause spalling, where chunks of the interior armor broke off and became deadly projectiles. Concussions, burns, and shrapnel wounds were common, even in survivable engagements. The cumulative psychological trauma was immense. Seeing multiple tanks in your company explode, watching friends die horrific deaths, constantly being targeted, this all left deep, invisible scars. Many veterans carried the burden of these experiences long after the war, suffering from what we now recognize as PTSD. The unspeakable horrors weren't just the moments of impact and fire, but the enduring mental torment. It's crucial to acknowledge that the Sherman was not a bad tank in an absolute sense. It was mass-produced, mechanically reliable, and adaptable. It had excellent operational range and could be maintained relatively easily in the field. Its sheer numbers ultimately overwhelmed the more sophisticated but fewer German tanks. However, this statistical victory came at a terrible human cost. The doctrine of using tank destroyers for anti-tank roles, combined with the need for rapid production, meant that individual Sherman crews often bore the brunt of these strategic decisions.
The Allies did make efforts to improve the Sherman, the jumbo Sherman with its significantly thicker armor, and the British Firefly with its powerful 17-pounder gun were direct responses to the Sherman's vulnerabilities. These variants provided much-needed firepower and protection, demonstrating that the issues were recognized and addressed where possible. But these upgrades didn't come soon enough for countless crews who fought and died in the earlier, more vulnerable models. Ultimately, the story of Sherman crews is one of profound bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. They knew their tanks had weaknesses, they knew the dangers, yet they climbed into those steel coffins day after day, week after week. They were often outgunned and out-armored, but they never stopped fighting. The unspeakable horrors weren't just the explosions and the fires. They were the constant, gnawing fear, the claustrophobia, the isolation of battle, the devastating loss of comrades, and the knowledge that, at any moment, your world could turn into an inferno. The M4 Sherman played a vital role in winning WW2, but that victory was paid for with the lives and sanity of thousands of courageous young men who faced some of the most brutal combat conditions imaginable. Their story is a powerful reminder that behind every piece of machinery, every battle, and every victory, there are human beings enduring the unimaginable. Thank you for joining us as we explored this often difficult chapter of history. What are your thoughts on the Sherman's legacy and the experiences of its crews? Let us know in the comments below.